All right, guys, welcome back for another podcast. Today we're talking a little bit about business theory as we kind of make our way through process. So here we go.
Welcome to the podcast.
We can try to direct it. So
Just have to apologize to everyone before we even get this started and how lofty this is about to get.
yeah, this is kind of a big one. So this actually, to kind of take it full circle, we had received a question online, which again, I think we should start to at least open up questions. I mean, honestly, if we want, we can make an email podcast at pawhealth.net, and people can just send questions to that. So it doesn't matter, whatever you guys want. Sometimes it can kind of help direct these podcasts, but again, PAWCast at pawhealth.net. Just shoot your questions over, and we'll give you a little shout out. This one actually comes from Joanne, a longtime friend of mine, and basically, I think we're going to pose the question and then we'll end the podcast with it. Yeah. So it was more along the lines of having a monument practice and sort of where can we take it from here? How can we sort of increase sales or increase patients seen, essentially invoices. So like I said, we'll sort of end with that. We can certainly read the formal question towards the end.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
It kind of gave us a little jump point before we started the podcast and just saying like, how can we actually turn this into being somewhat useful? But a lot of it comes down to looking at where we are in process between wellness and ailment and engagement and recapture and walk-in and extended hours. But again, at the core of that is service availability and affordability. I had this funny experience as a wee young lad. I was, how long? I was probably 18 years old, 19 years old, something like that. And I through the National Italian American Foundation, I had applied for this scholarship or this grant, but essentially they had flown a bunch of us over to Italy. And we all started, there was 200 of us, I think, or there was 100 of us, and we started in Rome, and 50 went north and 50 went south, essentially. So it was pretty cool. But we all started in Rome, and we saw, Colosseum and, some of those other kind of key points. But we were down in Foro Romano, so it was kind of like just this kind of lower formative area. And they were just, here's this old building, and this is, all degenerated and what have you. And I kind of looked over and I looked way over and I was like, what is that way over there? It's this thing with all these slats. It was like all these little things. And they said, oh, well, that is where they used to have vendors. Now, this thing was like, I think it was like 4 or 5 stories high. And it looked to be maybe, and again, doing this all from memory. I mean, it's probably a 20-year-old memory at this point. But it seemed like it was probably like maybe 50 units wide and 30 high. I was like, those are probably apartments or something like that. It's pretty cool to think in ancient times. So I'm like, what is that? And like, they used to have market vendors in there. And I'm like, what does that mean? What are you talking about, market vendors and that? And like, well, everyone used to have their own small shop in there, and people would come and they would buy whatever wares they would need. I said, is that a mall? And the lady was like, well, technically it's more of a, can. I'm like,
That's a mall.
No, that's a mall.
I've been there.
Yeah, right. And, and of course it wasn't functioning, obviously. It was like,
Yeah.
the facade was gone.
Yep.
And she was like, yeah, okay, Carlo. Yeah, it was pretty much a mall. And I was like, huh. And here I thought malls was this, new modern thing where people went to buy wares. And I was like, huh. So if we're saying that this existed, in the time of antiquity,
right,
and we still have it now, I don't know what the hell they were selling in there,
right,
but it existed.
Yeah.
And it kind of, at that time, I didn't know, of course, the theory that it was sort of instilling in me, but it was one of these where everything changes all the time, but you're going to have sort of these core business practices that and they always exist in society, but there are portions that are innovative, and it's going to change with the times. But the idea is that for the most part, business is business.
Yeah.
But I think what it kind of comes down to is then I had recently, what kind of sparked this memory is I saw just a very short video from
Simon Sinek.
Simon Sinek,
Yep.
About the idea of the infinite business,
Right.
and that was I mean, I know you know a little bit more about it than I do. But it's the long game, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
And assuming that there are no winners, eventually you're going to have some degree of failure. But in the end, you know, the goal is you're trying to have this sort of long-standing business, at least while you exist. But as soon as you no longer exist, there's a potential it just goes away.
Right.
And for me, I think, you know, it basically, when I look at business theory in that regard, I think it keeps it incredibly light. I mean, why not take risk? Yeah. You know, if at the end of the day we have, you know, this old mall of antiquity, it's like, well, this structure still exists. How many thousands of years later? The people, the merchants, they're not there anymore. But you know, of course, this structure still stands. So I think that's where, for me, when I started looking at that sort of infinite business type idea, it's like, all right, well, if we're saying that, you know, at least in our current state of affairs, and we start talking about the medical profession, at least in some capacity, whether it be the human side, whether it be the animal side, I think it's pretty safe to say that moving forward, this is an institution that's going to continue to exist. Yeah. At least up until what is the end of civilized society. So if that's, again, a portion of what our infinite business is, I think it gives an incredible opportunity to accept risk and to not fall into sort of the comfort of, you know, tradition, and understanding that, you know, at least in some regard, if we're playing the long game on this rather than the short game, there's a significant amount that we can gain from it. For us, it's purpose and well-being, right? I mean, that's PAW Health Network, purpose and well-being. But I think, you know, again, when we start to look at it and trying to keep it light, and understanding that, you know, with risk comes reward, or at least there's the potential for. You know, you're never going to catch a fish if you don't put your worm in the water.
Exactly. So with all of that stuff, you know, in what you're, you know, it's funny because there's always those parallels, right? Between, because I had no idea that you had that story.
It was just in there until I saw that Cynic video, and I was just like, huh.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's been a governing principle.
Right. Yeah. So I'll direct people to, in this instance, actually 2 different books. The one that we won't necessarily hit on too much in this is, again, I think we talked about it last week, but Good to Great. So there are 6 rules that are in that book that will actually direct people towards playing, as Simon Sinek puts it, the infinite game better. So I would recommend checking that one out, because the idea in that book, and the parallel that to our industry, is basically the traditional monument practice is a good business model. But in the book, he talks about how good is actually like the mortal enemy to being great, because you get really comfortable. So it's six different ways to really understand when you're just leaning on being good or good enough, and then how to get out of it. So definitely check that one out. But then the second one is, and I will say I have not read this book, but I've watched Simon Sinek talk about it for upwards of probably about 10 to 12 hours, is called The Infinite Game. So the idea is that in life there are 2 different types of games you can play, one being finite, one being infinite. A finite game has an established set of rules. There's a beginning and there is an end. The example he uses very often is baseball. So first inning, 9th inning, 27 outs, assuming that the game isn't tied, the game is over, there's a winner, there is a loser, we move on to the next one. And in the book, he talks about a lot of how business is actually practiced in that same way, where we look at very finite details, finite metrics in determining whether or not we are successful. And that is something that has overall, not just in veterinary profession, but I would say that it definitely does it, especially on a corporate level, but it decimates culture. It greatly increases your turnover, and it really just focuses your attention to the wrong things. It turns into serve essentially the invoice, because I want to win there. Because over time we will ultimately even if we go into it with great intention, most of the time for playing that game, we end up into financial worlds, and that's the only thing that we really focus on. And then it's just a downhill slide from there.
And that's actually most of the gripes you'll hear about veterinary corporate medicine is when we, one, of course, whether or not the veterinarians are in production or not, but, certainly when they're on a pay base that puts them into negative accrual, or what's your numbers and your production and how much are you generating. And you're exactly right. It does all of those things. It destroys culture, core values. I mean, that is never really even a discussion at that point, and it starts to get away from what is actually serving the patient. And you said exactly, it's serving the invoice.
Right. So, so that's like the thing that he basically cautions us all against, because if you play by the rules of a finite game, ultimately you will realize your end. Yeah. So he, in the book and in all the talks that he's done on it, I'll link a few different examples, some shorter, some longer, is actually just getting away from that entirely and just focusing on serving a specific and shared purpose. Yep. So for us, although it was not incidental, the definition that you had provided at the groundbreaking, which you came up with that day, and I'm still mad about a little bit, was, PAW being shared purpose and well-being. Well, those two variables actually are directly in correlation with the idea of playing the infinite game, because if we're just focused on continuously fulfilling a shared purpose and continuously making sure that we have people that are have a substantial well-being so they can do that on a continuous basis, everything else in terms of what would be considered finite success points come behind it. Yes, there is some time between putting it out there, making the transition and realizing financial success. But basically it's like, no, go do the right thing and the success will follow you. Yep. And then with that too, it's not something that has an end. You can continue to push towards purpose. You can continue to go along this process of just not really focusing on the finite details, and it will simply just swell up behind you in success and just continue to propel you forward.
That is actually literally the story of who I am. Right. I mean, truthfully, and I used to say it as when I was kind of an earlier associate veterinarian, is I paid karma, and I think I've said that in PAWCast before, but the idea being that even though I was a veterinarian who was paid commission or paid on production, it was never a governing principle. It was, I had a responsibility, and that responsibility was to treat the patients who were treatable and the suffering of those who weren't. I mean, that was pretty much it. And then, again, that led into, well, how can we do that effectively? Well, we have to be effective communicators. And if we are effective communicators, we have to be effective educators. And all those things sort of started to come together. And that's what was that's so bizarre about kind of our story, mine and Katie's, and certainly PAW Health, is that as soon as I started doing that, I mean, my other classmates that I would have, to other relief veterinarians that I'd come across, or part-time vets that we'd have in the practice, everyone was always talking about some of those short-term goals. What's my production this pay period? What's my overall compensation structure for the year? I mean, those are things that you need to know so you can, of course, have somewhat a standard of living. But I just never really ever paid attention to it. But somehow I was always more financially stable than anyone else I had ever talked to. And it was like, well, how are those two things connected when the last thing I'm thinking about is actually turning an invoice? And what I'm focused more upon is that serving the patient and doing what's right by what I was trained to do. And then, like you had said, it just swells. And then it's like, oh, I'm doing it. And now the practice, and now ownership, and now industry. And it's been incredibly bizarre being an outsider looking into my own life, to see that. But it's been truly remarkable. I mean, like I said, that's just been the story of who we are.
So basically what that was in that instance was kind of what we've turned into our ERT, right? So we went from individual into team and then into community, and now working up into industry is really what our focus is. And now it's on paper,
Right.
but it's been, as you said, governing principles for a long time. But the other side of that is the other piece to this conversation is that with that, we've also gotten, you have been able to weather the storm of kickback on being that type of person and having a business structure that ultimately does that, because what you have to firmly believe in and be able to implement is to know your process extremely well and to abide by it. So again, the example that he uses in the book and in the videos is the Apple executive that sits in with the limbos, right? So he's like, they're talking about the iPod, and then the other guy busts out a Zune, and it doesn't even phase the Apple guy. He's like, yeah, it does this and this, and it's way better than yours. He's like, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, the Apple exec was like, yeah, probably. Yours is probably better.
Right. Yeah. And it just doesn't break him of anything because he knows with Apple, why he's doing what he's doing, what the overarching purpose is, and it doesn't shake him in any way. Yeah. And then the way that he flips that example is if it would have been a Microsoft exec in that limbo and he were to take out an iPod and say, yeah, it's better than yours and blah, 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 he's going to grab it.
Oh, yes.
Right. And he's going to be like, yeah, this is how we can do better. Like, I want to win on all of these things. Yeah. And I mean, look at the marketplace.
Right.
I mean, Apple, I don't even think since Jobs has been gone, has even been that great. Yeah. And it hasn't mattered at all.
Right.
They just keep growing.
Yeah.
So, so in our instance, don't be the guy that's the Microsoft exec. Don't cave on your process because because of getting kickback or somebody maybe, running past you in one set of variables.
Yep.
For us, it's going to be, complaint management. It's going to be, patient advocacy, patient accountability. It's going to be turnover, right? We're going to have people that you're going to bring in. You're going to think you're going to be able to live by your process, but ultimately they just fall off because they weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
These are all things that we've worked through.
Weathered, yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's just pushing our way out of the hurricane because that's what this is. There's that level of comfort in being good enough and living in the middle of that, but you're going to have to weather the tough stuff to get out of it, because once you do, the world is your oyster. Yeah. And there's nothing really that's going to get in your way to fulfilling this shared purpose that you have. Yeah. When we were at MSU, I also kind of had talked about this to the student group that we had in front of us, and it was really focused on that shared purpose. For us, it's very clear. It's serve the patient. But I looked at the whole group. I was like, I don't know what your purpose is here. It could be that. It could be serve the caregiver. It could be serve an invoice. I personally don't care at all what your purpose is. But I do care if you know what it is. Yeah. Because you have to have the self-awareness and understanding. Why are you here? What are you seeking to fulfill? And then go into an environment in job interviews and all that sort of stuff. That should be the first thing that's on your resume and the first thing that you say, because it provides the absolute and utmost clarity to everyone around you of why you're showing up.
Completely.
Right?
Yeah.
Not something that's necessarily taught on any level, and I understand why. Yeah. But that really is just going to push people, again, into this belief in process through shared purpose. And then ultimately, if you have a team that has shared purpose, well-being, even with no effort, will automatically increase because you're more fulfilled by the people you're around.
Yeah, absolutely. And even to that exact end, to build upon that statement and saying list your own individual purpose, that would be the first question I ask. Yeah. Going into a job interview, and just the idea, like when you said that, put it on your resume, I'm like, holy crap. Mm-hmm. If I ever saw a potential new hire who has a written purpose on their estimate, like that's some big picture thinking. Yeah. I mean, that's an individual who, in general, I mean, not just because you're fulfilling a line item and, every resume has to have a purpose now, don't just slap something on there. It's like, where are we really starting with this? And actually, I remember I remember, and actually, we talked about this. I think one of the very first times we had Caroline on the podcast is when she was talking about doing her milk culture routes. You know, and I was, when she was originally telling me about that, it was her purpose was she wanted to, essentially help drive help support and feed the world. Right. Essentially, what it boiled down to. And I'm like, there's a purpose you can get behind. Right. There is something that you can call it noble, right? Because I think in general, if you have a selfless purpose, you will, of course, maintain a certain level of nobility in fulfilling that individual purpose. I think, what is it? It's if it doesn't matter who gets the credit if good work gets done. Yeah, it's kind of that idea. Yep. But yeah, that's same way. It should be asked of an employer. During an interview, but more importantly, an employer should be coming forward with it during the recruitment phase. Yeah. This is our shared purpose. Do you align? Yeah.
So in our interviews, that's why our interviews take so long, because we actually take probably they're typical for a good one when it's like, this is a potential, right? Yeah. You've got your initial screening bit, but then you go into phase 2. And then with that's honestly about like 20 to 30 minutes of Annie and I both talking.
Just about us?
About us.
I love it.
And it is just the definition of what they can expect before they ever step foot even into a working interview. Yep. Just like, here's what it is, here's what our expectations are, and here's why you are here. Yep. If you can get behind that, there's really not a whole lot of barriers that are going to stop you from succeeding, but here's why you're here, and this is how we make that happen on an everyday basis. Yep. And we never really talk about their quote unquote individual success or like the finite detail, right? We talk about, like what their pay range is and all, just to make sure that but again, maintaining well-being, right? Yeah. It's not really about, well, these are the invoices that we turned last year and this is how many patients we saw and this is how we're beating everybody else that's around us. It's like, nah, I really don't actually care what they're doing. Yeah. They're doing what they're doing and we're doing what we're doing, and we're going to keep going down this. Yeah. The other caution that I do always put out there is they have to be ready to stand on process and not cave on it. Yeah. Because that can be a hard thing. We've realized that with a lot of staff is that they don't really have the gumption to tell somebody no or to set the standard right away. And then the caution is, well, if you do that, if you break process, you're only going to set everybody else up to fail because we're all living by process. Yeah. So
it's a hard fail too.
Oh, every time. Yeah. Every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of now I caution using this example, but the office space of the Bobs. Bob, when I make one mistake, I have to hear about it from seven different people. But and it's like, of course, the joke is it's just this total monotonous type environment. But for us, it's like, no, it actually does really affect 7 different people.
It does. Yeah.
We have so many different processes, so intimate with one another. But the other part of our accountable profile and sort of maintaining the unity and so on and so forth is that while we may have a similar circumstance where you'll hear it from multiple people, it's an environment where we don't actually want you to fail. Right. So it's like, hey, this affected this many people. You may not have even been aware that all of these different things connect with one another. Yep. Please don't make our job more difficult. However, we just want you to simply succeed.
Right. It's really just edifying the process. Like,
stand on process. Yeah.
It's what we kind of talked about last week, where I was like, just please fail, right? Yeah. Because that's the opportunity of failure in this instance is actually just going to prove through the hard knock why process kind of is the way that it is. Provide the opportunity to shift that process if there's a better way to do it.
Absolutely.
But ultimately just trying to improve so we don't actually go, in the office space example, the thing that drove him the most nuts was it was just like, here's where you screwed up, period. Right. There was never really anything to go around it, and it was just the same people saying the same thing 7 different times, and just how that person was not good at what they did. Yeah. That was the end of the story. Yeah. So in our example, it does go probably 3 to 5 steps further, depending on the scenario of like, mistake, absolutely, acknowledge it, own it,
Yep.
Now we're into solutions.
Yep.
But there is definitely some similarity in there where you might hear from it from a couple different people.
Yeah. But again, part of the interview process and saying we really need some adherence to process.
Yeah, it's just a warning basically.
Yeah.
So
and it's not crazy stuff. I mean, we've said that several times in this podcast. Like, it's not like we have policy for the sake of having policy.
Right.
It's that we have policy and procedure as it directly relates to our abatement or reduction of conflict.
Right.
So it's what we say, the two biggest problems is inefficient process and unnecessary conflict. All we're doing is essentially saying that, inefficient process and unnecessary conflict, and our goal is to essentially serve the patient and educate the caregiver. We just have to bridge those two sort of, Venn diagrams, so to speak. What's the perfect thing in the middle of all of those? Yep. And that's essentially what we're shooting for, is that mark.
Mm-hmm. So that definitely pushes us directly into what we kind of digressed from, is this idea of playing an infinite game, which means ultimately serving a purpose greater than yourself.
Yeah, you have to.
So
otherwise it's finite.
I would say so.
Yeah, because I mean, we've even had that in some of our, a couple of our employees or whatever that are past employees, where it was we had the one individual twist our core values to serve herself.
Yep.
So it's a very finite game to only focus upon those things that serve you.
Yep.
Now, again, I mean, yeah, that's fine. You come into the world alone, you leave the world alone. You have to, there's a component of it that you have to serve yourself, but that is the shared well-being component. Yeah. So it's okay to have, sort of barriers, or it's okay to sort of have limitations. I'm only going to go so far, which is perfectly acceptable. But again, when it comes back to the business development, the business theory side of things, you have to go selfless.
Yeah, absolutely. The well-being portion is essentially, just to summarize it, it is you cannot pour from a cup that's empty, so make sure your cup doesn't go empty.
Yeah,
right. Like do what you have to make sure that you are fulfilling yourself. Yeah. But ultimately, you cannot pour all of yourself into something and then expect more to come out.
Yes.
So different people handle that in different ways. I know you and I are different from a lot of other people, where we're actually fed by being at work, which is really weird. But either way.
Yeah, and I think for somebody hooked a hose to the bottom of my cup. Like, it's just,
you're just one of those bottom filling beer mugs. You ever seen one of those?
Yes, I am one of those. If there was going to be an analogy for me and some item, it's going to be a bottom filling beer cup. Yes.
I think those are the coolest.
Yeah, they're pretty awesome. Yeah. I just don't know how to keep them clean, but
me neither.
Yeah, that grosses me out. But anyway, so yeah, coming back to sort of the finite and infinite game. Yeah. I mean, there's a component when you're looking at the business, and kind of how I started out earlier on, is you have to be willing to accept that most of these institutions are going to be here beyond you, especially at this point. Yep. And we need to accept that, while, at least in some capacity, being, I guess, a steward would be one way of putting it. That's a term that I pulled from the Humane Society, but being a steward of our business or our company, but for me, like I said, when I pay karma, is I think really what that has turned into is me paying karma is leaning into process and serving the patient. So for us, I think, because I know that our ultimate goal is noble, is that I think that's where I've been consistently comfortable in destabilizing our company. Yeah. And I think that's sort of, we talk about which we talked about the innovators, which we'll touch on here just one second. I think I may have talked about this in a previous podcast, but Katie and I had made the determination that we weren't going to pull any money from the company for the first 5 years. And part of that was any additional profit that we would make from one year to the next, we just invested back into the company. So we were just like, we had our wage as veterinarians. It was a livable, sustainable lifestyle. We're not over the top, and by any means we live below our means. At least we try to. And it was just money back in, money back in, money back in, money back in. And that's what I think what we look at as being the destabilization of the company, or at least one interpretation of destabilization. So if you're saying that, oh, I have this business, and this business, when I purchased it, was financed, and well, that finance actually is a part of our expense. So now we're increasing operations, and above the increase in operations is now increased profit. It's like, well, that's your nest egg. Why are you giving away your profit? That's your profit. You worked for that profit. That's yours to keep. That's your profit. No.
Right.
No, it's the businesses. I work for the business.
Yeah.
And the business works for the patient.
Right.
And me as an employee of the business, yeah, I'm the owner. I mean, when it comes down to tax time, that's a pretty hefty bill. But, but I am an employee of the business, and I'm here as the business owner, to push harder than anyone else.
Yeah.
And essentially then what comes with that is the harder I push, the harder other people push. And
right.
that's been pretty fun, actually. High five, Ben. To see that process as well, to say, gosh, there are a lot of people who see that it's not even just a matter of being passionate, it's a matter of being fucking dedicated.
Yeah.
That is really what it is. Now you can say again, I'm dedicated to the business not failing. That's finite.
Yeah.
Infinite is I'm dedicated to serving the patient, because that is a sustainable component. That is something that'll never end. The business can, but for me to say, oh, okay, so here's the profit that we're making, and dump it back into the business, it always came back.
Yeah.
It always came back, where it was like, oh, okay, that's weird. We just dumped in, how many tens of, into it. And then, the next year it was doubled. Okay, that was weird. Why? So that then it becomes the investment.
Right.
So you can talk about stocks and bonds. You can talk about, mutual funds. You can talk about all these different things. But I think why I'm so passionate about business, especially when we're talking in an industry where there's a significant issue with debt to income ratio, to me, it's like, well, okay, no, literally everyone needs to be, at least in some degree, an owner of a practice. I mean, at least there are plenty of practices out there that are willing to sell right now. And if we're talking about us improving process, and that's why a lot of this is, again, in theory, is for us to start to talk about improving process, and we do it in a very methodical fashion, and we do it in a way that allows us to continue to serve more patients, and we can do it in a fashion that makes us more available. We do it in a fashion that increases our affordability. It's going to be incredibly difficult to fail.
Right.
And that, from an investment standpoint, always put your money on that. And I think that's where it's leaning into process. Always put your money in process. And that's what we do, even though we're destabilizing the company and saying all these profits we're just going to shell away. And so, well, what happens next year if sales are down? They're not going to be down next year.
Right.
I am banking on the fact that what we're doing is virtuous, and what we're doing is noble. What we're doing is we're serving a cause. We're not serving an invoice.
Right.
We're not serving production bonuses. We're not serving these things. And I'm confident that basically, again, providing the services for the general community, and understanding that it is an industry that's going to be here beyond me. It's just trying to set that standard. The investment has always come back. It has never been a fail. So that's where I think when I talk about I'm comfortable destabilizing the business, it's because I'm so adamant that our process works. And I'm so adamant that core values work, and that our education system works, is that it's going to be incredibly difficult to fail if you can if you can implement 100% of what we've implemented. Your children will be successful. Yeah. If you can implement a portion of this, then yes, that's a little bit more of a finite, finite type game that way. But
it didn't happen overnight either. Right.
Took some work.
That's where that dedication thing kind of
took some work
in, because it was. I mean, I was not there on an everyday level. However, I saw the Monday morning Carlo and Katie on a number of days.
My one day off.
Your one day off, and it looks like you were ready to, just pass out a few times. Yeah. It's like it's not. I'm not going to say that this is easy. Living essentially what you could say a type of a life that is of servitude. Yeah. Even if it is to just that shared purpose, there is definitely a sacrifice that is included in that. But ultimately, that's why you go back to purpose. And I would challenge everyone to at least investigate the book that Man Search for Meaning, because that's, again, that idea of like, if you know what your purpose is, no struggle is too great. There's nothing that can really take you away from it, so long as you stay true to your ultimate purpose and pushing to it, even if it's to find what your purpose is.
Sure.
But no barrier is too substantial to the realization of your individual purpose. And for us, the nice part about it is we have removed the overwhelming majority of those barriers, provided it to people, and then said, all right, here's what it is.
Yeah.
For the first few years, some of it was implied. I would say
within
enough,
the business. Yeah.
I would say enough of it was implied to have gone through some significant growing pains.
Yep.
And now that's why, when we were at MVC a couple of weeks ago, and everyone was like, what are you selling?
Yeah.
Right? That was like those that were already practicing and all that. I was like,
MVC is a Michigan veterinary conference, for those who don't know. But so we attended, basically we're on the show floor, essentially.
So we were right next to like the Heska, the big vendors of the industry. Like, what are you trying to sell? An idea.
Yeah. Right.
That you can do all of these things and ultimately realize, greater success at a team level, individual level, a business level, a community level, all of these things, and it's already made for you. And if you were to go to buy this from somebody else, it's probably going to cost you about $15,000, and here it is for free.
Yeah, at minimum.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So all of these. Right. So that was like, we went from the growing pains, and then we started to write it down, and now it's like, well, here you go, guys.
Yeah,
like, here it is for free.
Yeah.
And that's why those that have been listening to this on a pretty consistent basis, I don't think that that's any sort of stretch of the imagination to assume that if a consultant were to come in and put the amount of time and effort that we have put into these ideas, both in development but now discussion, cost you a lot of money.
Yes, correct.
So just take it and run with it.
Well, and that's, I think, even in that, to touch upon things you said before, where there's no turnkey solution. And I think that's what I would like to reiterate with this process is it's malleable.
Yeah.
The foundation is there. I mean, when you buy Play-Doh, you pretty much get your stock colors, and you can make whatever you wish. It's that idea, is that not to totally interject, but
that's all right.
That's the whole point, is that there's no turnkey, but what's here is so powerful.
Yeah.
You can sort of mold it into any business structure. So one of the things that Ben and I, and actually the whole PAW Health team, is we've been working with one of our local humane societies, and we've been doing both sides. We've been focused on the medical care, but on the other side, it's also been the administrative components as well. So for me, I mean, I'm meeting with them at least once a week now, just to kind of help with some of this. And all we're doing is running through culture and core values. We're developing their education system, and we're taking the nuts and bolts of it, where it's like, oh, well, in our organization, we have caregiver support staff, medical support staff, our CVTs, our DVMs. Well, in their organization, they have their, animal care advocates. They have their, intake leads, adoption leads, medical leads. So for them, it's a very similar. They have different job descriptions. Yep. They have different responsibilities. Those things I don't have a great respect of. I'm sorry, I don't have a great understanding. I have respect that they do it, but I don't have a great understanding of what that is. But that doesn't mean that I can't facilitate our process in their organization. Like our core values work: trust, respect, unity, accountability. Ours is serve the patient. Theirs is be an effective steward. Yep. So it's those types of things where, as we move through this, it's all incredibly malleable. But like you said, from a a consultation company to come in and be like, you need to do this because the last 20 practices we consulted on, their numbers went up from this to that, and their profitability, and look at how great this is, and you have to do these 30 steps, and here's the key metrics, and this and this and this. All I hear is finite.
Right.
It's the finite war. It's the finite battle.
And that's what typically why people fall off of those
strategies.
Those strategies so fastly, because they don't realize the finite.
Well, we did that now.
Right. We checked the box.
Yeah.
We won.
Yes.
Where's the wait? What?
Right.
What happened? Where's the success factors that I was supposed to actually realize?
Yeah, and that's actually some of the sadness that I have for our profession is because, I mean, like we had said, I mean, really the small animal medicine was developed in the 80s, you know, I mean, in early 90s, really. So we had an incredible amount of innovators at that time, you know, innovators and early adopters. So it's, you know, and then it just kind of like, well, we hit the checkbox, and then we're good.
Yeah.
And then we were good.
Yeah.
And that was good. We helped a lot of animals during that time, and that's good. However, we can't stay what that was.
Yeah.
You know, and I would argue that for the most part, and I mean, when you talk to a lot of the vendors, I mean, Heska and these other companies, for the most part, on a nationwide level, most veterinary clinics are doing good.
Yeah.
You know, so it's there, like I said, but it's time to bring our profession into greatness. It's time for us to lay that new foundation and basically become innovators once again.
And that's the other half of this discussion, right? Of how do we take this monument practice and start to convert it into a new era of veterinary medicine. So we've got, you know, shift your mindset, create process, ultimately to serve something that is greater than yourselves. That's really what we just talked about for the last 30 minutes.
Right.
It's just mindset, write it down, and get the team that is ready, willing, and able to fulfill that. Read The Infinite Game. Read Good to Great. Read Great by Choice too. It's another one by Jim Collins. Read a gluttony of other books. Right. Get those principles that are bigger than veterinary medicine into your head, and then implement them in your system. That's what we did. We boiled a lot of it down into the ERT and all of these things, but it is a mindset. Check your mindset and get people that are of that same mindset in your door, because once you do that, that's when we get into the law of diffusion of innovation. You are now a innovator in your market that is going to, again, realize some growing pains. And you have to have that mindset as you venture out through the hurricane to get to get outside of it. People around you are going to look at you like you're crazy.
A lot.
A lot.
Yes.
But over time, what you will have happen is you will venture out, you will start to realize some successes, and then people will start to follow behind you, and you will stay consistent. There will be forces drawing you back into that comfortability, and you will go against them by a very consistent and implemented process. And over time, you will start to actually gain a significant market presence or market penetration that will change the industry as a whole. That's what we're trying to do. That was the whole idea behind getting microphones and cameras and all this shit, right? Is to basically just put it out there and say, time to innovate, guys. Time to grab on, time to be a part of the top 20% of everyone that's in our profession and start to make a difference. So I'll link the video. Actually, we're going to pause right here. And we're going to drop in the piece from Simon Sinek about the diffusion of innovation so that they can understand kind of what we're looking at. It's about 2 minutes long. So
here we go.
Here we go.
Something called the law of diffusion of innovation. And if you don't know the law, you definitely know the terminology. The first 2.5% of our population are our innovators. The next 13.5% of our population are our early adopters. The next 34% are your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards. The only reason these people buy touch-tone phones is because you can't buy rotary phones anymore. We all sit at various places at various times on this scale, but what the law of diffusion of innovation tells us is that if you want mass market success or mass market acceptance of an idea, you cannot have it until you achieve this tipping point between 15 and 18% market penetration, and then the system tips. And I love asking businesses, what's your conversion on new business? And they love to tell you, oh, it's about 10%, proudly. Well, you can trip over 10% of the customers. We all have about 10% who just get it. That's how we describe them, right? That's like that gut feeling, oh, they just get it. The problem is, how do you find the ones that just get it before you're doing business with them versus the ones who don't get it? So it's this here, this little gap, that you have to close, as Jeffrey Moore calls it, crossing the chasm. Because you see, the early majority will not try something until someone else has tried it first. And these guys, the innovators and the early adopters, they're comfortable making those gut decisions. They're more comfortable making those intuitive decisions that are driven by what they believe about the world and not just what product is available. These are the people who stood online for 6 hours to buy an iPhone when they first came out, when you could have just walked into the store the next week and bought one off the shelf. These are the people who spent $40,000 on flat-screen TVs when they first came out, even though the technology was substandard. And by the way, they didn't do it because the technology was so great. They did it for themselves. It's because they wanted to be first. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. In fact, people will do the things that prove what they believe. The reason that person bought the iPhone in the first 6 hours, or stood in line for 6 hours, was because of what they believed about the world and how they wanted everybody to see them. They were first. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So,
all right, so law of diffusion of innovation. So everything that we are talking about and have talked about for however many hours on the podcast and everything that we've been doing for the last 5 years is with the accidental understanding that this is that 3% type idea. And that from a market penetration perspective, the reason that we at times we've talked about, right, like getting kind of even just like firing caregivers to a point, or like being willing to say no to people or whatever it may be. That's the idea of just accepting the fact that our market penetration is really still within that first 17%. From a staff perspective, we haven't really been able to swell up a ton because we've really needed people to be open to change, open to the mindset of being that first 17%. And we've had people fall off that weren't a part of it. Like he said in the video, you won't get the you will not get the early majority without early adopters. So we've pretty much, sometimes by complete accident, focused our attention almost exclusively on those types of people. From a wellness plan perspective too, right? Like similar concept. Like you put it out there and you just read the reaction. And if they're like, yes, I want that, like they're gung-ho on it, like sold, done. Like that they're going to be a caregiver for PAW Health for life, probably. But sometimes there's just that wall. Cool, that's great. Not a problem. Just know that it's not going anywhere, and we're going to continue to work on it. So a lot of things that are kind of included in that. I personally tend to look at this from more of a staffing perspective because, again, in interviews, one of the things that the early adopter is they have to be open to the concept of continuous but effective change. I remember one individual that doesn't work with us anymore. She was probably like 3 weeks in, and she was like, things just changed so fast. I'm like, get used to it. Because we're always improving.
I think I was standing there for that conversation.
And it's one that continuously happens too.
I just kind of smiled and I was like,
I guess. What's the joke you always use? Don't even get comfortable with the toilet paper because that might change too. Like everything's on the table, everything's on the chopping block. That's that destabilization type thing, right? But what we found is that those that are a part of that early 17% are greatly fulfilled by being put in an environment that will allow for that to happen. And again, considering our audience, and the thing that I really kind of cautioned at MSU about, Katie really pushed it hard too, was basically a lot of these kids are going to get out of vet school, 23, 28, somewhere within there. Typically, you got your second lifers in there too. But they're going to walk into an environment that's going to see, even if they are of the mindset of being a innovator or early adopter, it's going to just squash it. Right? Because it's good, right? Like those types of mindsets take away from good. There's risk involved with that. Sometimes risk that a lot of times that those structures aren't willing to take on. And that's very demotivating. That's, go back and listen to some of the previous podcasts about autonomy, creating value on an individual level, being able to be yourself, having first emotional interactions, all that sort of stuff. That's an innovative idea, which is to me, mind-boggling, and sad.
Yes.
But there's there's so much opportunity in creating a space where you can actually innovate on any level.
Yeah.
Like change something, make it better.
Yeah.
At least freaking try.
Yeah.
Because again, as you push towards that and with a genuine purpose that is shared amongst a group of people, and you push for change for that reason, it will start to swell up behind you in some way, shape, or form. You're not making the change just to make more money or to realize more invoices or some sort of or to beat the competitor in some way, shape, or form. It's for genuine and legitimate purpose. Right. And with that, you will start to watch your team grow behind you.
Yes.
I mean, you are of no way a part of the hiring process.
No.
Really at all. No. And the team is swelling behind not you.
Right.
We do want to caution people don't work for Carlo, they work for PAW, because Carlo works for PAW as well. Right. But it's
pushing with me.
Right. It was the mindset was there. It even took Katie a while to get behind that. Right. Yep. So you had to start with square one. But now it's like, now we've got a team of 30.
Right.
And now we're looking to expand that team out even further. Now we're bringing students in on 3-week basis, and they're saying, I don't want to go anywhere else. I'm afraid to go somewhere else. Right. Because I found my purpose here. That's all I got.
And that was, I mean, honestly, when I started, several years ago when we started integrating with Michigan State, I mean, because again, part of it was proof of concept. I mean, we were in tandem, and actually, so we were in tandem. We were running several things at one time. So I was telling my buddy Jeff, I put it like 10 different irons in the fire, hoping 2 would strike hot, and all 10 fired up. So at that time, it's not to say that we were writing checks, so we had no intention of cashing, or but or paying rather. But anyway, you know what I mean. Yep. But the main idea was that as we started to look at building, all the different parts that is and was PAW Health, at that time, connecting with students, these classes are 100 big, so maybe 80, maybe 110, somewhere in that ballpark. And it's like, how am I going to be able to, create a market, to market to all these different students and all this? And it's like, nope, one. Connect with in a whole class. Connect with one person, because if we can connect with that one person, then we've at least been able to establish not necessarily proof of concept, but we have furthered our goal of serving the patient. If we are going to be in the central Wisconsin area, north central Wisconsin area, we can only influence that which is within a 60-mile radius, 100-mile radius. But if we can connect one, now we have another area of 60 to 100-mile radius. We connect with 2, and those go to separate locations. Now we're double, so then we start to say, okay, the more we can integrate in with more innovators, the 1%, the 3%, that ultimately then sort of became our goal, was just focusing on those that we actually turned their head, where they're like, wait a minute, what? It's like, oh, did you look over here? Because if you looked over here, I'm going to pull you over and be like, just take a look, see what this is. So that's been it. And then the more we start to have that momentum, not necessarily with just that university, but just the innovators. So I agree with you as well. When I look at it, I still don't even look at the market penetration from the perspective of how many caregivers we can market to. That still doesn't, when you had said, well, I'm speaking more in terms of, the hiring process. I'm like, oh yeah, I wasn't even talking about, how many clients we were going to get. It was going to be, how many people can we get behind this idea? Because I mean, even for, we just got our 2019 financials, we saw another over 30% growth of the company in 2019. And that was, again, how much went into marketing?
Very little.
Practically nothing. So for us to say, well, how did we do that? It's, we've been focusing on sort of having this small influence, looking for the innovators and early adopters within our team to sort of help uphold the principles and continue to push the business forward. That's been about it. And then everything else is sort of, everyone has it. Just this, what was it, Sunday, Georgie? It was like, I don't know, of other clients, she's like, oh my God, just had a third client today want to convert over to us, and it's like, it's lean into process, services between wellness and engagement. I mean, all these different things, that's how this bleeds out. as soon as we have, or at least trying to get people as best as we can to no longer be conflict averse, where if they are met with conflict in the room, it's not being conflict, being willing to engage conflict doesn't mean you are argumentative.
Right.
It means that you just don't fold.
Yeah.
And like you said, having the difficult conversations on, no, this is the process. We don't really, there are times where we do make some special exceptions, but for the most part, process is here because, like we said before, we got 7 other people that are going to be involved. And what ultimately ends up happening is if I make a decision to break process and I do not effectively communicate what that break of process is to those 7 people, you individual who I broke the process for, it's going to get infinitely more difficult for you and your patient, because it's going to seem like we don't know what the hell we're doing, even though it was just one person who broke process that, sort of caused this trickle down effect. Again, I know I'm kind of rambling off into that particular example, but
it's an important one though.
Right. But again, when it comes back to the growth of the company and what we're talking about for the innovators to the early adopters, that's essentially has always been my approach, or at least what I focus my approach into the younger crowd of veterinarian. And that's the same thing. If I look at trying to overturn business owners and I try to overturn some of the other veterinarians, I try to overturn some of these, it's like, no, we have tapered and coned down our approach to being a smaller part of the market that are the innovators and the early adopters, the ones that are just about to get out of school or who just got out of school. First, we always say pre-graduates to 3 years out, because it's a smaller part of the market that has the potential of causing a incredible amount of change in our profession, and it's there, and we have the framework for it.
Yeah, and you don't even need that many people to do it.
No, really. we did it. We did it with 4.
Right.
That's how it started. It started with you, me. I guess 4. I'm doing my math wrong. 4. You, me, Annie, and Katie.
Does that count as math? That's counting to 4, Carlo.
Yes.
He can do all the drug calculations, but he can't count to 4.
Yes. I got that calculator. Like when they said you won't always have a calculator in your pocket. No, I'll have a frickin' supercomputer. Thank you, Apple.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was honestly when we were at Michigan State, and as we continue to push out into the university environments, that's all we're looking for.
Yeah.
That was when we were at the veterinary conference. It would be like, what are you selling? Well, I'm selling this idea. Here's like the 30-second explanation, and you'd get the yes. They would see the cards that say the industry is dead, and they would be like, wait, yeah, it is. Tell me more.
Right.
And then some of them would be like, just blindsided by it. Yeah. And you'd be like, you know what? Here, take this. If you're interested, we got a whole bunch of stuff on our website. Right. Here you go.
Yeah, we got
Have a good day. Right? You just let them find the world on their own time.
Correct.
At some point, the early majority is going to come into play, and they might be a part of it, and they'll be like, hey, I remember that, right? Yeah. Like, I wasn't ready for it then, but now they have this proof of concept, and they have all these people behind it, and it's working, and they're being able to show legitimate results.
That's the early majority.
The early majority, yeah. So that's when you get up into that 50%.
Yeah.
Once you have that, you win. Yeah. Once you cross the chasm, once you get into that, you've tipped. You're into now just to a point maintenance. Yeah. But also continuously, because you kind of have to feed it too. You have to feed innovation into that on a continuous basis. And that's why the guy from Apple is like, well, you know what? Yeah. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing because we're innovating in the way that we do. This is our process. This is the way that it works. And the Mac Pro is out, and they've sold a ton of $50,000 computers. Yeah. Right. It just flat out works. Yeah. So So we take. All right. So now we're gonna come back to the question that we had, right? So the question was, I have a monument practice with banker's hours run by 2 doctors. Do we come in earlier? Do we stay later? What is your best recommendation to better utilize what we already have? Yep. So we have in our answer, we've gone to start to play the infinite game, understand the diffusion of innovation that is necessary to create the change that you want to see in your practice. So check your mindset, know the people that are going to do it. Now, in terms of specific process, once you cover those 2 things, the answer will probably become very, very apparent. Right? I don't actually think you and I can provide the right answer
Right.
to that question.
Yeah.
Now, we have a ton of ideas. We were kicking around before the podcast.
I think we had like 6 to 8 different potential answers to it that each carry their own degree of merit.
Right. So there's a lot of other variables that are included in that, in the fact that we don't know the market, we don't know what what's existing staffing wise, we don't know how ready they are to create that level of change, the willingness to work 10-hour days, 12-hour days.
Yep.
If they want to work 36 hours or 50 hours,
Yeah.
like there's a whole lot of unknown. And
Yeah.
to answer this would be to assume so many variables that it would actually, it's the idea, in this instance, I would actually say of informed consent into change.
Absolutely.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
We don't have the whole variable,
Yeah.
but in terms of the cost associated within that algorithm,
Yep.
here's how you can at least fulfill the descriptions of those variables. And check your mindset, go through the culture stuff, make sure
culture,
that you're
core values,
right,
yep.
and then understand the people that you have. Do you have a bunch of late adopters, or do you have an innovator on your team that's going to be ready to create this change with you,
Yep.
so that you can ultimately distribute it
Yes.
naturally? You can't, because if you try and force it down everybody's throat and you don't really have that type of mindset, and you don't really have the culture that's going to sustain it, you're just going to beat your head against a wall until you just stop.
Yeah, like we've said before, culture and core values is the pill pocket of process.
I don't think we've actually. You may have had that thought, but I love it.
It's pretty good. But fixed culture, fixed core values. You have to establish that first. And the way in which you instill that is through your education system, because that has constant touch points and ways in which you can institute those core values. I mean, we got posters hanging in the clinic. We got all those types of things of the PDFs we have available on the website. And I agree with you. I think to have sort of the blanket, what do we do in sort of these monument type scenario or these monument practices? I think the what and the how and the why. I think ultimately, from a guideline standpoint, it's what we've been talking about in process this whole time: availability, affordability. Now, affordability doesn't mean cheap.
Right.
Affordability means that there is a respectable markup on either services or on products that make you profitable, but not to the extent that you are no longer affordable. And that's where I think what we need to be cautious of is, my individual opinion across the board is extend hours. Get into the post 5 p.m. world as best as you can. But then in doing so, don't jack up exam fees just because there's an after-hour fee or after-hour service. Don't, that's going to make you less affordable. You're becoming available, but you're maintaining pricing. That's our pitch. Our pitch is 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. It's the same cost. There's no markup. There's no, after-hours expenses. It's just in a year, this is what it costs for us to keep the business open 24 hours, and that expense needs to be reclaimed through, essentially sale. It's just business. But again, if we come back to, how we started this entire thing about me seeing, the mall, basically, and the mall of antiquity, also acknowledge that the industry will outlast you. So if we are talking about the short sort of finite game. So if we try to jump into the infinite game, then you will continue to last with the industry. And that's the innovation component. That's going to be the early adopters, in that capacity. So like you said, find those individuals. Maybe they're in your team, maybe they're not. So finding the innovators and finding the early adopters ultimately may end up being a change of recruitment strategy. It may end up being, we have some turnover that we're going to have in the staff. Well, how do we effectively turn over the staff? Well, why would you need to turn over the staff? Well, do you guys have core values? Do we have an appropriate culture? Are we educating the caregivers? Are we serving the patients? Do we have a shared purpose? Do we have a shared sense of well-being? And that's why, like I said, to take what we have. So how do we take this, what was our recommendation for monument practices? It's essentially start to identify your barriers. So if what we're saying is what we're doing works across the board, it works. From what is our barrier to culture and core value? What is our barrier to instituting an education system? What is our barrier to increasing availability? What is our barrier into increasing, or at least regaining a certain level of affordability? And we start to identify those variables, but we use this type of platform because we've already talked about traction, we've talked about 515, we've talked about a lot of these workflow tools, and basically into saying that as long as we have this, again, the shared purpose, we have shared well-being, but the big thing is to serve the patient and educate the caregiver. That needs to become a day-to-day talk path. That needs to bleed through everything that is done. And even now we're starting to have that conversion of conversation. Like, we had one of our mentees up here these last 3 weeks, and it was just like, there would be someone who was spouting off, potential some disparagement when I was there and within earshot, and I was just like, I mean, that caregiver just sounds like they weren't very educated. That's part of what our job is. They're like, yeah, I know, you're right. It's just like, get to that second emotion, have your first emotional response, and then get to the second one, and the second one should be educate the caregiver and serve the patient. Right. But that's ultimately it, and I think what sometimes, like you had what you said before, I think what sometimes is challenging is finding the innovators. But no one should be pushing a business harder than the business owners.
That's true. The other thing about innovators that I actually would say should provide a lot of people a lot of hope is that when many podcasts ago, I don't even remember which one it was, we had talked about how the alignment of a millennial. And like how when you get them on the same page as you, or you get them onto a purpose, they will run harder, faster, stronger than the majority of people that are in the workforce. That's what that is. I think they're the team we have. I think that there are an absolute ton of innovators and early adopters. Absolutely. I think that we're actually going to be pushing more in that direction because of the millennial generation, now the I generation as they call them. They are used and almost expected to be innovators and early adopters because that's the culture. Like, I got to have the newest thing, right? They're being trained that that's the right way to do it. Now, that's a double-edged sword because it's also creating a great lack of self-worth when they're not able to fulfill that. So I don't really like that side. However, that's why Gary Vee's catching such a big head of steam too, because he's like, screw all that financial crap that you think you need to be an early adopter on. Be an early adopter on ideas that are going to change the world. Correct. Right? So he's creating an army behind him of people that are like, you know what? I don't need the Navigator. I can drive the Ford Focus and I can still make a huge difference. I can still put ideas out in the world and I can make things happen. So
I think we have a window where there, again, even potentially a tip point on that with our millennials and is that if we as now sort of the elders of the tribe don't provide some degree of opportunity. Now, I'm not saying the innovators can't just go off and do their own, but I think where we're at with these generations, it's another kind of like limbo state where it's like we have a lot of people who they know they really, all of us want to make a difference. We want to be a part of something. We want to, do it together. We want to, we want to have that excitement. We want to have that purpose. And then it's like, well, shit, there's an entire industry where it doesn't exist.
Right.
Okay. Right. Well, then what? Then we're going to have, a lot of icebergs, is what it boils down to. And then we're not going to have any innovation. And, we're at a point where the opportunity we have, the access of resources, not necessarily just what we're creating, but every single podcast, there's links to books or videos, these other people that are doing this stuff. It's like innovation is happening all around us. And I think we come back to, the hurricane analogy too. It's like, to a certain capacity, our hurricane is the one that's blasting through fucking everything else up. Like, right? Like we got to get out of the hurricane that we made, not necessarily because it's going to serve ourselves to get the hell out of the hurricane, but we're going to be able to serve so many other things when we realize, oh shit, we're the problem. Right. Yeah, right. Absolutely. It's and the being in the middle of the hurricane, in some capacity, you could even, say that we're victimizing ourselves, but you just get out. Yeah. You get out and there's so much additional support out there. Like I was going to say, one of my good friends, Jeff, I've been kind of teaching him a lot of these different concepts, and he's kind of run the rabbit hole in some of these, and he's like, oh my God, there's a whole subculture of accountability.
Yeah.
He's like, there's a whole group, there's a whole world that you don't know it exists. He's like, but then once you get into it, oh my God, is it addicting?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, yeah.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, yes, that is the curse of the problem solver.
Yep,
you know?
absolutely.
But yeah, so again, you know, not to completely skirt the question, because, you know, I think to have, you know, do 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, I mean, that's getting back into the finite game.
Yep.
But for us to look more into the infinite game, it's like you said, it's, you know, check your mindset. So get core values, culture into the practice. You're going to start to identify the innovators and the early adopters. Those are going to be people that stand by your side as you start to introduce these things. And if no one stands by your side, find them, because they are there. You can integrate them into your team. Yep. There's probably going to be a destabilization of the company in doing so. It's not going to be comfortable. There's going to be some bad weather that we have to wear in order for us to get out of the hurricane. It's going to be very difficult. But once you get people who run with you, you get people that start to push with you, it starts to become easier, and the process as a whole swells. And I think we even talked about this a few weeks ago in just talking about our quantity and quality. All we're talking about is you're not increasing quantity of business, you're increasing quality of business. And it's not increasing quality to go from a good business to a good business. It's to go from a good business to a great business. And that's all this process is just push the company forward, serve a purpose. And the purpose is to educate the caregiver and serve the patient. And you're going to do it in your team through a sense of shared purpose and well-being.
The first step is the hardest one.
You're right. Yes.
Like you're in the zone of comfort. That first step out into the weather is going to be the hardest one. It's going to feel like the one that has the greatest level of force to push you back into good.
Yep.
And that's the put on your boots and helmet.
Yep.
It's time to go.
Yep. Grab your spade. Yep.
Let's just get out there. Just get out and just try something, because the nice part about it is, again, the industry is going to outlast you.
Yep.
It's not really going anywhere. You have especially for our certified staff.
Yep.
You've got a very valuable skill set that is transferable in many, many different ways.
Yep.
So you're already kind of mitigated a substantial amount of that risk. So what do you have to lose, man? Like, just get out and do it. So that was our super pep talk for the day.
Right.
I will leave the floor to you, Dr. Carlo, as we finish up here. And that's our whole thing.
All right. Well, like I said, guys, certainly feel free to shoot us any questions. That's going to be PAWCast at pawhealth.net.
They can comment on the videos
comment
and
on the video.
podcasts too.
Sure.
We'll catch them.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Yeah, Ben will circle on that. Anyway, we're always happy to answer what we can. Soon we will be in the new studio and starting to do live casts. Not too far out, but either way. All right, guys, we'll see you next week. So thanks for listening.